If you look really closely at running, you can learn a lot about the essential questions of human life. You understand the way we deal with certain types of resilience. You can understand certain things about relationships. You can understand certain things about yourself. When you run, it's just you. If you succeed, it's your success. If you fail, it's your failure. If you are disciplined about your running life, it will help you set habits that are good for the rest of your work life.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lavin Voices, a podcast from the Lavin Agency. I'm your host, Charles Yao, Director of Speakers here at Lavin. Our guest today is Nick Thompson. Nick is the CEO of The Atlantic. Before that, he was editor-in-chief of Wired. And before that, he was the editor of TheNewYorker.com. 3 very big jobs. Stories that he has edited and assigned have won major awards and been made into films, including Argo, which won the Oscar for Best Picture. On top of everything else, Nick has long been a competitive runner. In 2021, he set the American record for men 45 plus in the 50K race. And for the past 5 years, he's been quietly writing a memoir. It's a beautifully written book on distance running, family life, endurance, resilience, and so much more. It's called The Running Ground, a father, a son, and the simplest of sports. Adam Grant rightly notes that it's a meditation on what it takes to marshal and maintain motivation. Filmmaker Ken Burns says simply that it's an amazing memoir. It's my pleasure to talk to our good friend, Nick Thompson. Here's our conversation. So today it'd be great just to talk through, because the book's actually pretty prismatic. It is about running, it's about pain, it's about growing older, it's about masculinity. Like, I don't want to attribute things to the book, but thematically it seems to cut across a lot of stuff. The kind of classic stuff of talent, grit, motivation, resilience. But maybe just to start, we can talk about something that you wrote, which is that running is unique because your opponent in many ways is actually yourself. It's all internal.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the hypotheses of the book. The general idea of the book is that if you look really closely at running, right, and if you study it and try to understand it, you can learn a lot about the essential questions of human life, right? And so you can understand the way you deal with certain kind of pain, and you understand the way we deal with certain types of resilience. You can understand certain things about relationships. You can understand certain things about yourself. And what makes running, I mean, that's probably true of lots of things. And it happens to only be that running is the thing that I care about a lot. But one of the reasons for that is that, when you run, it's just you, right? If you succeed, it's your success. If you fail, it's your failure, right? When you play on a soccer team, you're not, you can always say, well, it was the other person's fault, or I played great, they didn't play great, or it's okay, we lost. And then the second thing is that it's very quantifiable. And so it's very hard to tell, like, whether you're getting better or worse at tennis, but I can track my marathon time precisely, right? And so, I had this experience, you might have seen it on LinkedIn with the photograph of me looking like I just been, dying, but I ran this, very intense race with a, very high goal that I calculated very precisely. And I just missed, right? I just missed the American record by like almost nothing, right? On Sunday. And the experience of like, what do you go through internally to try to like focus and to do that prep? What is it like to, be on target? What is it like to be off target? How do you feel those last 20 minutes when everything is at stake? You can't really prepare for those last 20 minutes. There's a lot of emotion and there's a lot of intensity in that. And so the goal of the book is through partly telling my story, partly telling the story of my relationship to my father, and partly telling the story of other runners to get at some of these really interesting questions.
Right. And because you're right, it is multifaceted in that way. But in terms of the resilience part, what are some of the lessons there? Because as you say, you came so close to doing something and then it just didn't happen. I'm guessing that's demotivating in a way, but I'm also guessing you are going to run again.
I am, or I'll try something else. I mean, like, even when you get it, like, does it feel that different to succeed? Does it, like so much of the fun is in the chase. And so much of the enjoyment, one of the other things I like about running, it's kind of a lesson that I've taken for work and for everything in life, is like, the thing you learn when you become a really intense competitive runner is that if you do focused training and you kind of show up every day and you run when it's raining and you run when it's hot and you run when you hurt, like, you will get better, right? And if you don't, you will not get better. right? And it's pretty clear. And so you kind of remember that when you're running and you go and you have a bad workout. Like, so in this build, I've gone through the last, I don't know, it's been like 16 weeks. I've been preparing for this race. And there are days where I've had terrible workouts, and there are days where I've had like really great workouts. And you just kind of remember that you're not as good as your great workout. You're not as great as your terrible workout. And as you're not as bad as your terrible workout, you're not as good as your great one. But you just keep going, you just keep doing it, and you just focus, and you like sort of set your goals, and you hit them, and then eventually you will get wherever you get. So it teaches you a kind of resilience, habit. It's almost like confidence, like the confidence that if you keep moving forward, things will get better. And I think that's it's a really good lesson in life.
Right. And it was surprising to me actually that you said winning or breaking a threshold or a record actually doesn't feel that different than coming up slightly short of it, which makes me think like, is it all a means to an end, but the end doesn't matter? It's the means that
kind of, right? Kind of. I mean, like there's basically nothing at stake if I hit that record. It's only like that's the goal that I set, right? Like nothing changes that matters in the world. But it's a way to sort of structure my training and to structure my thinking. So I think no less of myself. I mean, I would think less of myself here's the interesting thing. Like I was really tired at mile 46, like really tired. And it hurt so fucking much, right? And if I had dropped out or started walking, like then I'd be kind of disappointed in myself, right? But like to have gone for it, right? And there's no question that like I tried as hard as I could. And, I look back at Nick on Sunday, really struggling those last miles to just try to get any second faster. I actually, crazily, the course was a loop with cars. And so you couldn't like do direct tangents around the corners. And so when I had run 50.0 miles, I had the American record. But the course, that's not where they measure the endpoint. The endpoint is like where they put the finish line, which was actually like another half mile to a mile ahead because the course is measured based on your ability to run tangents in perfectly tight corners. And over time, you have to like stay out of the way of a couple cars, and it like increases your distance. But the key, like the lesson from that race is, the effort is what you remember.
Right. Right. Because as much as you don't get the outside accolades or the third party like legitimization of winning, I'm guessing you still want some sort of internal motivation to do your best, to run the 2:35 as previously you ran a 2:37. So can you talk a bit about, I guess you've answered some of it, about the internal motivation needed to train 16 weeks for essentially 2.5 hours?
Right. Well, fortunately, with ultra training, you're training 16 weeks for like 5.5 hours.
Oh.
Yeah, it's an interesting. There's a complex dynamic because you need to, or not everybody needs this, but I need to set the race in order to motivate and structure the training, right? But the fun part of the process is not the race. That's like a little bit. The fun part is the structured training, right? The fun part is like going out there and going through this process, this cycle of kind of feeling your body getting stronger and like, understanding the line between fatigue and injury, right? And understanding like the limits to which you can push yourself before you snap, and like figuring out the structural challenge of how to get the workout in when your speaking agency has booked you a fucking event in Las Vegas and you have to leave at 5 a.m. This was the best. I did an event in Las Vegas, and I had forgot to bring a t-shirt, right? And it was like cold. And so I brought a jacket. So I actually ran in shirtless and a winter coat around the dome, right? But like the fun is like figuring out how to, the fun is the process. The process is the really fun, wonderful part. And then the actual race itself, it's great. And it's a good way to structure the whole process. And you do have to do it. You do have to do it in a focused way. And it does matter how you do in the race, or it does matter to you. It doesn't really matter to the world how you do in the race. But if you told me like you can either have one or the other thing, you can either have the race, you can have the training, you definitely take the training.
Right, right. A lot of what you're touching on here is kind of the dynamic between your physical capabilities, what your muscles and bone and muscle memory and body are capable of doing, and a kind of mental fortitude, what you believe yourself to be capable of doing. Can you talk a bit about that dynamic?
This is one of the most interesting dynamics that I learned about in the book, right? So I've been running since I was 15 years old. And I had always thought until a couple of years ago that what slowed you down is physical pain. And that the reason why, even if you're running one lap around the track, the reason you can't go as fast at the end is because something physical has happened in your body, right? Lactic acid has built up, hydrogen ions have built up, blood has stopped flowing to your muscles, whatever it is. And it turns out that's not really the case. The reason you slow is because your body wants you to maintain homeostasis. And so your brain is measuring all these things inside your body. And it's measuring temperature, it's measuring blood flow, it's measuring hydrogen ions, lactic acid, right? It's measuring all that stuff. And essentially what it's doing is it's then calculating, okay, how much effort will it take to get to the finish line? And will I be able to maintain homeostasis at the current pace I'm going? And if the answer is no, it then starts to make your body hurt, right? And so it then starts to it's almost like your brain triggers a pain response. And then that is what makes you slow. Okay, so the first question is like, how do you know that, Nick, right? Like, that's absurd. And part of it is because when you're running and you pay a lot of attention to it, what's so interesting is the pain in your body shifts all over the place, right? Like your ear will hurt, right? You're like, your throat will get dry. You're like, back will hurt, right? Like your quad will hurt, your ankle will hurt. And it's shifting because your brain is basically like trying different mechanisms to like show that you're faltering. Second way is there are all kinds of studies on this. And so if you take a group of cyclists, right, and you put them in a room, and the room is 50 degrees, and you say you're going to bike for an hour, and the temperature will stay 50 degrees, and then they go for 10 minutes, and you're like, how much effort have you put out? And so you take these cyclists, and the ones, if you tell one of them that the temperature is going to stay 50 degrees, and then you tell the second group that the temperature is 50, but it's going to grow up to 70, the ones who think the temperature is going to increase feel more pain, even though they've done the exact same amount of work in the exact same temperature, because their body is expecting conditions to get harder. And so you have this very strange thing where it's like this dynamic between your subconscious brain, your conscious brain, and your body. And so what that means is that you're constantly trying to like use your brain to trick your brain. Here's the other way I know this. So I ran this. I had a couple of breakthroughs in my life in running. So one of them happened when I was in high school, where suddenly I went from running 11:30s for 2 miles, which is like, okay, it's not great, but it's okay. And then one day running 10:48. Like, how the f did that happen, right? Like, no one improves by 45 seconds. Well, it happened because I was on a track of a different size and I didn't know how fast I was going, right? And if I had known how fast I was going, my brain would have shut me down because I didn't think I could do it. But because I didn't know how fast I was going, I was able to do it. So then my second big breakthrough, which is when I'm in my 40s, and I go from running like 2:43 marathon, 2:42 marathon, all the way down to 2:29, which is crazy. Nobody does that. Well, how did that happen? It's because I had a coach who basically believed that I could run much faster. And he kind of developed a training system to trick me into believing it too. So he would have me run like much shorter intervals. So I would get used to running at that pace. He would have me like look at my watch. So I would like not be uncomfortable when the pace is 5-minute mile instead of a 6-minute mile. And so he like rewired my brain to make me believe in myself. And then that's what allowed me to do it. Because if I didn't believe in myself, I wouldn't be able to do it. And so there's this intense, complicated conversation that is what creates the pain we feel while we run. And that's pretty wild. And that's one of the things I really came to understand in this process.
Right. And in both those examples where you had the breakthroughs in various stages of your life, the first one being that the outside receptors and the metrics you were unaware of and your brain therefore could not register against them. And in the second one, a human person actually tricked your brain and tricked you. So to extrapolate larger lessons about like, we have to trick the brain into tricking the brain. What are some takeaways there that go beyond running? Should we just put ourselves in new situations?
Yes. Right? Like you should put yourself in new situations. There's another good lesson is that you should like actually sometimes try to do things that seem impossible, right? And like to kind of go too fast, right? And if you have a project and you think there's no way you can actually like get it done in under 2 hours, force yourself to do it in an hour and a half, right? And just like see if you can do it. The way you build confidence and get better is by like going at an uncomfortable speed and going too quickly. So that's, I think, a very important lesson. You can't just say, all right, I'm going to run a 2:15 marathon because there is a line, there is a physiological line. Like no human has ever run faster than 2:01. So, certainly you can't run that. So there's like a line for everybody based on all kinds of elements, but you can get kind of closer to that line if you can convince yourself that you can do it.
Right. And you mentioned right now just that you had a coach and a kind of elite coach. And obviously, we started by saying that it's running such an internal thing. So I'm wondering what the role of that coach and the mentor and the encourager was in a thing that is ostensibly a solo endeavor.
Right. It's so interesting because I've had different coaches in my life. And part of the process of the book was understanding, why some worked and some didn't. So, I went to Stanford University, which is a very good school with like the best cross country team in the country. And I completely failed, right? I was like, I mean, not at the university, but at the running. And I never once raced for them. I was last in every workout. I sucked, right? And it was like a kind of bummer and painful experience. And, from the time I graduated in 1997 until a couple of years ago, I was like, when I thought about it, I thought the lesson was like, well, sometimes you're not good enough, gave it my best. And now I look back and like, obviously I was good enough. Like given the talent that I obviously have, like, of course I could have made it. Okay. So then it's not that I didn't have enough talent. So then why didn't I find that talent? Why had I not discovered that talent? And part of that's on me. And maybe it's because, you went to this prep school in New England where it was cold and it was hard to train all the time. So you didn't have as much time to like get better and you weren't around the best athletes. But I think it was actually the coach. It was because the coach didn't understand me. And the coach, like, he had this belief that anybody who ran for him, running had to be everything, right? And like, if you cared about your grades and you cared about other stuff, like you couldn't run for him, right? And that was his view. And that wasn't going to suit my personality. And so it wasn't a match. And so I left the team. When my coach, when I was in my 40s, the one who kind of unlocked this talent, he looked at me and he's like, okay, this is a person who has lots of interests and likes to do lots of things and likes to travel. I'm going to come up with the maximalist training plan that also fits his life, right? And I'm going to like make it so that he can do, as he said, like not do this one thing, but do all the things. And it was like strangely through that different kind of system and like building running into the life I actually wanted to live that I was able to unlock this talent. Whereas at Stanford, the coach like trying to build running not into the life I wanted to live, like a different kind of training and focus and attention and dedication that I couldn't give or didn't want to give. He wasn't able to unlock it. It's like, it's kind of an interesting paradox that the coach who wanted me to be all in got much less from me than the coach who wanted to fit this hobby into a like more ambitious, more complicated life.
Right. And I would say at Lavin, your peer group here, upwards of 12% of our speakers talk about talent, what it is, how to develop it. What are your general thoughts on it? The way you're talking about it, it seems like you think it's something innate that somebody activates, or is it something that everyone starts at the same level and they scale up?
There are a couple of things I can say about running talent. So part of it is innate, right? Like, running is essentially you can boil running down to a little bit to like a mathematical formula, like power multiplied by efficiency divided by mass, right? And so, the way your body is shaped affects your efficiency. Right. And if you are, at certain distances and, power also depends on like your mix of fast twitch and short twitch, slow twitch muscle cells, like, which is like genetically given to you. Right. There are a whole bunch of like elements that are into that equation. And then there's mass, which, whether it's genetic or whether it's not genetic, like we don't like to talk about it in running, but like you divide it by mass, it's a lower number, you're going to run faster. And so there are a whole bunch of innate elements. So that's one thing. So there is natural talent, right? And, I'm helping to coach my 10-year-old son's soccer team, like they're 10 years old. Why do some run a 6-minute mile and some run an 8-minute mile? It's not motivation and training. It's partly just talent and nature. So that's part of it, right? What's also true though, is that there's a different element of talent that folks don't sometimes notice. And this is the talent that I have in running. And in fact, that watching one of my kids, he has. And I didn't even understand this until much later in life. You often will go out at the beginning of track season and everybody will run a mile, right? And let's say I run a 450 mile and this other kid runs a 450 mile. Everybody assumes we have the same amount of talent. And then to the end of the season, we've done the same workouts. We've done all the same stuff. We've eaten the same food. and I'm running a 4:30 mile and he's running a 4:47. Like, so what happened? So I have this incredible talent of trainability, right? And this is my main running talent, where you can take someone who starts at the same point and is the exact same, looks exactly the same. We can run the same race and we can go do the same workouts. And at the end of those workouts, I'm faster, right? So I like adapt. And the same thing is true of my son. You know, he went out and he's like the slowest kid on his team, goes out, does the same workouts. He's the fastest kid on the team. And so that's one element of talent. Another element of talent, which I have, is that I don't break, like I don't get injured, right? And is that a talent? Is that a gift? Is that luck? Is that whatever it is? But I had this conversation. There's a friend of mine who is a national class runner. And I told her, there's a little scene in the book, we're running together. And there's a measurement in running. It's called your VO2 max, right? It's the amount of oxygen you can deliver to your muscles while in action. And that's often considered like the mathematical indicator of talent, right? If you measure everybody's VO2 max, and then when they're 16 years old, you line them up in a mile, the one with the highest VO2 max will win, right? And I have a very low VO2 max, and she has a very high VO2 max. And so we were running, and I told her my VO2 max, and she started laughing, right? She was like, I was like someone this good. And then she's like, oh, wait, now I understand it. She's like, I'm a car with a huge engine, but I brake all the time and I'm in the repair shop. You're a car with a small engine, but you never brake. And the question is like, what is the talent? What is the God-given gift? Is it the size of the engine, or is it the fact that the chassis doesn't break? And so that's another element of like talent. So that's just to say that talent is mysterious, right? Or it's misunderstood. And we often think of it in running as like the starting point, but it's not the starting point. It's the starting point plus the ability not to break and the improvement. So then the question is like, okay, and then how much of success is based on this sort of broad concept of talent, and how much of success is, based on training and other factors? And it's clearly a combination. It's clearly a deep combination of both. In running, it's probably 80% how much you put into the training. It's how much 80% the commitment. 80% the like the love of the sport that brings you out there every day.
Right. Because even in your own Stanford analogy, you had the talent, but it just wasn't processed correctly by somebody who clearly did not understand you were an engine, or you were, the chassis, or the piston, et cetera, et cetera. Just to move on, there's a very good analogy you have in the story about motivation and life paths, and success is not being like a mountaintop, like the Paramount movie logo. It's actually about a bunch of rolling peaks. So I wonder if you could extrapolate that analogy.
Yeah. So for a lot of my running life, I kind of assumed that your speed in, let's say, a marathon sort of follows this trajectory, which is up, 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 down, 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 right? And if you look at, fastest marathon times by age, it basically follows that track, right? Like the best 22-year-old is faster than the best 21-year-old time. 23 is better than 22. And then like at 28 or 27, it's the world record. And then like 30 is slower, 35 is slower, 40 is slower, 41 is slower, right? And so if you look on aggregate, there is this curve, right? And you basically, once you hit 31, you're cooked, right? Or you're in the process of decline. And the funny thing about my marathon times is that they don't follow that trajectory at all. My slowest times are at my athletic peak, right? The worst marathons I run are like at age 25. And then, at age 30, I get good and I stay basically constant until I'm 43. And then I get massively better. And so, what I realized is, sure, your body can be changing that way. And it's a percentage of like how you're going. But you can train and you can learn new things and you acquire wisdom. And I think what happens in running a lot is, there's a sentence I use in the book, which is that, you don't stop running because you get old because you stop running. If you if you stay focused on the sport and you learn new things, you can kind of learn enough to compensate, right? Like wisdom is a moving sidewalk going this way. Age is a moving sidewalk going that way. And so if you can acquire wisdom faster than like moving sidewalk going this way, you can kind of keep doing well and you can have like improvements as you go. Now I seem like I'm pretty much in a period of steady decline, which I assume will continue until my death, which will be in short order at my current working rate. But, that's where we are.
Right. Just two
Yes.
last questions. I mean, you write about having thyroid cancer and very descriptively talk about taking a pill that's like a radioactive pill. You quarantine for a week. Next week, you can't even walk one block. And that time frame thankfully, it's gone. You're clear. Bill of health is great. In
Yep.
that time, that was the post radiation treatment when you could not walk a block. What were your priorities then? And like, if you couldn't even walk a block, were you even thinking about running a marathon?
No, no, I had given up. I mean, it was interesting. So the cancer diagnosis was interesting because I had run my first really good marathon was in November of 2005. And I had struggled through my 20s, I hadn't been that good. And I run this great marathon. And I feel wonderful about it. And I had been supposed to see the doctor before the race. And I blew him off because I didn't want him to tell me, my knee really hurt a lot. And I didn't want to tell me not to run the race because he's the kind of doctor who'll tell you not to run. So I had blown off the meeting in order to run the race. And so I go to go to the annual meeting. He finds the lump. And so it was tied in with my running in a way. And then, I go through the treatment. It's horrible. I can't walk. I just feel like shit all the time. What I was just thinking was my thoughts were much more about family, meaning in life, what have I spent my time on earth doing that is worthwhile? I will just be dirt, and existential questions about meaning and what has done. And running was not part of it. But then once I started to get healthy, then I started to obsess about it because in a way, I think in my mind, I felt well, if I can ever run as fast as I was before I got sick, that means that I'm through this cancer, right? So to me, the moment was not you're through this cancer when you have a clean bill of health, right? Or it wasn't when your weight gets back up or when you're when you feel good. It was if I can run as fast as I was before I got sick, that's the demarcation line. And so then I began to really focus on it. And then, 2 years later, ran the same race in 8 seconds faster. And felt really good about that.
Right. As I mentioned, the book is actually about 4 generations of men in your family. It's about your relationship to your father, his relationship to his father, and your sons or various sons' relationships to you. So in terms of that part, what are some takeaways there?
Well, I mean, the main takeaway is parenting's hard. So my grandfather is, grows up on horseback in the Arizona Valley and works his way out and eventually goes to college and becomes an athletic champion. He's a boxing champion. He runs the half mile. And he's this stud. And then he goes to work as a missionary and then becomes a Baptist minister in Oklahoma. And he's working on a Native American reservation. He thinks he's part Native American, not really held up in the genetic analysis of the family, but whatever. And so my father then is raised by him. And my father is flamboyant, nerdy, and not, as he said, I was not the son my father wanted to have. My grandfather wanted a hypermasculine son, and my father was not. And so my father has this very toxic relationship with his father. And in large part, it's because he refused to play soccer and all that and never did any sports whatsoever. And my father's life is complicated to 1,000 degrees as I go to in the book, but just on this element. And so then when my grandfather dies is actually when my father starts running and starts running seriously. And he runs a 3-hour marathon. And I'm actually there at age 5, cheering him on in this 3-hour marathon. It's a very important, or age 7. It's a very important moment for me. And so my father would say afterwards that he couldn't run fast until his father was dead. He couldn't fathom succeeding in some psychological level until his overbearing father had disappeared. And so running to him was tied up in this toxic relationship with his father. So my relationship with my father. So my father, he takes me out, teaches me to run when I'm 5. I go see him at the marathon when I'm 7. He's my biggest supporter when I become really good in high school. But he also has this crazy life. So he comes out of the closet, he drinks too much. He eventually goes from being a successful Washington politician to running a brothel in Bali for his former Republican colleagues, right? It's a real arc. And he and I, one of the ways we communicate is we run together, right? And so we have this hard relationship, but actually pretty great relationship in part because of running. And so then, the next baton is me and my children. And like, I have no idea. I have been cheered. Like one of my oldest son, we go on these long hikes together. He thinks running is dumb. He's watched like how much I suffer in marathons, and he's like, definitely not doing that. But then my middle son, he's had this interesting relationship with running where he was the slowest kid on his team. And then he started training, and now he just crushes them. Like, they ran a mile at practice the other day, and he was like 45 seconds ahead of the second fastest guy. He ran a 5:15 mile. Like, he and I are going, my next big race is I'm racing him in an all out mile this summer. He's 14 when I turn 50. And then my youngest son, I'm coaching his team in running, and he's loving it. And he's got all the talent in the world. And so, one of the questions is like how they will look at running when they're older, when they're adults. Will they have felt like their father pushed them too much, and they had this overbearing dad who talked about this stupid sport and like put this pressure on them. Will they be grateful? Will they like do it themselves and love it? So that's like one of the questions that the book ends with.
Right. Parenting is hard. That's the takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard and complicated. So I got the list of your takeaways. I'm cognizant of time. Just want to run through a few of them. The very last point, there's a tension between freedom and analysis. So what do you mean by that?
I mean, so part of the book is profiles of these characters. And so one of the people I profiles is one Bobby Gibb. And she was the mother of a friend of mine in high school. And she was also the first woman to run the Boston Marathon. And she had this beautiful spiritual way of thinking about running. And so when she trained for her marathon, she took a van. She took a van across America and just like, ran in every forest she came upon. She felt like running is not a way. She just doesn't care about her times. All she cares about is this beauty, right? And she becomes this, feminist pioneer and icon. Another woman I profile is Julia Lucas, and she also had a very like spiritual beginning in running, and just found this incredible talent, and like was maybe the most talented runner in the country. And speaking of talent, and the question you asked before, like Julia's never run sport, never done anything. She shows up her first day in cross country, and she wins the whole freaking meet, like beats everybody on the varsity when she's 14 years old. And she goes on and she comes as close as you can to making the Olympics. She, gets out-leaned at the second after like making a bad, silly mistake. And she becomes a very good friend of mine. And she ends up having like kind of a toxic feeling about her life running. And the reason is she felt like she had become, as she said, like the bad guy in Rocky, just like too focused on the metrics, on VO2 max, on the heart rate monitors. And she had lost like the spiritual side of it. And when I told her about Bobby Gibb, her response was, that's what I should have been. Right. And so I was thinking about the two of them, which was the point I made in that talk I gave, that, sometimes to get better, you have to understand everything. Like, you have to track your heart rate. You have to, think about how to improve your VO2 max by 1%. And sometimes you just have to let it all go. And sometimes you have to just like listen to the birds and like go run in the mountains. And for each person, if you have to figure out the balance, and whether maybe you should just run for the birds like Bobby Gibb and don't worry about your time, right? Or maybe you should like toggle them on and off the way I do. So that was the point of that.
Right. No, that's good. And just once, one more, 3 words: discipline is cumulative.
There are 2 theories of discipline. One is that like, if you are disciplined in the morning, it makes it harder to be disciplined in the afternoon, right? And this is there's a lot of psychological studies that back this up. But all those have been debunked. And now every study, and I think every bit of data suggests that if you're disciplined in one thing, it makes the next thing more likely to be disciplined. And so I believe that if you get up at 6 o'clock, right, and you like brush your teeth and then you go running or whatever you do, right, whatever you do that's focused, the rest of the day, you will be more focused. It's not like there's not some limit of discipline. It's you build up habits that then make you more disciplined. And I think it is true over time too. Like, of course, there's some limit. If you're like disciplined for like 23 hours straight and you don't sleep, you're cooked. But I do think that if you are focused and attentive, and running can play a role in this. And it's part of what I like about running is that, and part of how it fits into your work life, right? Which is, if you are disciplined about your running life, it will help you set habits that are good for the rest of your work life.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick.
Catch you later. Ciao.
We have these conversations with Lavin speakers every week. If you like what you heard today, please do subscribe at YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Nick or other Lavin speakers, visit thelavinagency.com. Thanks for listening.